ladies and gentlemen. Have you ever chased a ghost, someone who vanished not with a bang, but with a silence so loud it echoed through your soul? Let's face it, avoidants don't come back unless you make them. And no, I'm not talking about manipulation, I'm talking about mastery. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff, not knowing whether the leap you take will lead to flight or a fall, yet still you jump. Why? Because waiting in the shadows of uncertainty is far more terrifying than facing the truth. This isn't just about attachment styles or relationship psychology. This is about reclaiming your power, understanding the rules of emotional distance, and learning how to magnetize presence instead of begging for it. What if I told you that the one thing pushing them away could be the very key to drawing them in? But before you grab that key, you need to ask yourself, are you ready to stop being the chaser and become the one who's truly wanted? Let's walk through the moment they left, the reason they stayed away, and the exact shift that makes the avoidant turn back, not because you begged, but because you became unforgettable. Emotional detachment isn't permanent. It's a protective pattern, not a final decision. This truth can feel both comforting and frustrating, especially when you're on the receiving end of silence, distance, or withdrawal from someone you deeply care about. It's tempting to believe that when someone pulls away, it's because they've stopped feeling, stopped caring, or worse, never cared at all. But often, emotional detachment doesn't reflect a lack of emotion. It's a defense mechanism, a shield built over time to protect vulnerability, not erase it. Avoidants, particularly those shaped by early emotional wounds, aren't emotionally numb, they're emotionally guarded. They've learned to associate closeness with risk, intimacy with danger, and dependency with disappointment. When someone gets too close, their system goes into defense mode, and distance becomes their safe space. Think of emotional detachment like a safety switch. When triggered, it doesn't destroy the connection, it simply suppresses it. The feelings may still be present, quietly burning beneath the surface, but they're locked away behind caution, fear, and a need for control. This is not a choice made with cold indifference. It's often a subconscious strategy, developed through experiences where vulnerability led to hurt, where needs were ignored, or where trust was repeatedly broken. To survive, some people decide it's safer to feel less, to want less, and to need no one. But wanting less isn't the same as feeling less, it's a strategy to manage emotional overwhelm. When an avoidant detaches, they often appear indifferent, calm, and in control, while the other person might spiral into confusion, panic, or deep sadness. This contrast isn't accidental, it's the visible result of two different emotional regulation systems. The avoidant may feel emotionally flooded when connection gets too intense, and rather than confront those emotions, they shut down, pull back, or disconnect. It's not that they've made a final decision to walk away from you, it's that they've reverted to a well-practiced survival pattern. They may still care, still wonder, and still feel the loss, but expressing it feels unsafe. So instead, they remain silent, convincing themselves that distance equals peace. It's crucial to understand that this pattern wasn't created overnight. It was shaped through years of emotional programming, often beginning in childhood. An avoidant might have grown up in a home where emotions were dismissed, where vulnerability was seen as weakness, or where their emotional needs were not met consistently. So they adapted. They stopped reaching out, stopped expecting, and started depending only on themselves. The detachment became a source of pride, a symbol of strength, control, and independence. And in adult relationships, this same pattern resurfaces, often unconsciously. Closeness begins to feel threatening, and the instinctive response is to retreat. But because it's a pattern, it can be disrupted. Patterns are not destiny, they're habits. And habits, no matter how deeply ingrained, can be rewired. However, the shift won't come through pleading, chasing, or over-explaining. It comes through stillness, space, and self-possession. When someone who's avoidant senses pressure, they retreat further. But when they sense stability, calmness, and emotional self-sufficiency, they begin to feel safe. Safe enough to reflect, safe enough to feel, safe enough to come closer again. Not because they were persuaded, but because the environment no longer triggers their defenses. What we often misunderstand is that emotional detachment is reversible, but not externally. You cannot force closeness on someone who's afraid of it. You cannot demand vulnerability from someone who's spent a lifetime suppressing it. But you can influence their internal world by changing the dynamic. When you stop trying to fix their detachment and instead begin focusing on your own grounded presence, something subtle but powerful begins to shift. Avoidants aren't immune to connection, they're just hypersensitive to pressure. They need to feel like choosing closeness is their idea, not your expectation. This is why detachment feels final to those on the outside. It's a one-sided experience. You see the silence, you feel the absence, you witness the lack of contact or emotion. But what you don't see is the internal tug of war, the questions, the buried feelings, the inner voice that says, "Don't reach out, it's not safe," even when their heart whispers, "I miss them." Avoidants often struggle to identify or name their emotions in the moment. What feels like nothing to you may feel like too much to them. Their silence is not necessarily rejection, it's resistance to being overwhelmed. So no, emotional detachment isn't permanent. It's not a dead end. It's not a declaration of disinterest. It's an old coping mechanism that's still active, still running the show, even when it's no longer serving them. But here's the thing, patterns remain unbroken until something changes. And sometimes that something is you. Not by becoming someone else, not by pretending you don't care, but by becoming emotionally consistent, present, and whole without needing them to validate your worth. In doing so, you create a quiet invitation, an energetic shift that speaks louder than words. This is a safe space, not a trap. Authentic self-worth is more attractive than constant pursuit. In the emotional tug-of-war of human relationships, especially those involving avoidant dynamics, this statement holds a mirror to the very core of what draws people together or pushes them apart. When someone constantly chases another, what often lies beneath is an unconscious belief that their value must be proven, earned, or validated externally. That if they just do enough, give enough, or love hard enough, the other person will finally see them, choose them, stay. But this chase, no matter how well-intentioned or sincere, can often send the opposite message. I don't feel whole without you. And that kind of energy, while understandable, rarely fosters real connection. In fact, it can feel overwhelming, unbalanced, and even repelling to someone who already fears emotional enmeshment. People aren't attracted to neediness, they're drawn to energy that feels stable, centered, and self-contained. Not cold or distant, but secure in its own right. Authentic self-worth is not about pretending not to care. It's not about playing games or withholding affection to gain power. It's about knowing deep in your bones that you are enough, without the chase, without the approval, without the other person having to affirm your value. This inner certainty radiates in a quiet, magnetic way. It doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It doesn't collapse in fear of loss. It simply is. And that isness is powerful because it allows space for mutual choice rather than emotional dependence. When you operate from self-worth, your actions shift. You stop texting to get a response, you communicate to express. You stop checking your phone every 5 minutes, you return to your life with confidence. You stop analyzing every word, every silence, every signal. They no longer define your worth. The irony is, the less you try to convince someone to stay, the more your grounded energy makes them wonder why you're not chasing. That wonder creates curiosity, and curiosity is often the first step toward connection, real connection, not one built on fear of abandonment, but on the freedom of mutual respect. Constant pursuit, on the other hand, creates imbalance. It says, "You are the prize, and I must earn you." But relationships that thrive are built on equality, not hierarchy. When one person chases while the other retreats, the dynamic becomes skewed. The chaser loses themselves in the process, often bending, shrinking, or abandoning their own needs just to maintain the illusion of closeness. And in doing so, they unintentionally reinforce the belief that love must be earned through effort, that they are not inherently enough. Authentic self-worth challenges this belief. It says, I don't need to be chosen to know I am valuable. That doesn't mean closing yourself off emotionally. It means showing up with your heart open, but your boundaries intact. It means being available for connection, but not addicted to it. It means recognizing when someone's inconsistency is not a reflection of your value, but a mirror of their own internal conflict. And instead of reacting with panic, you respond with presence. You become the calm in the storm, not because you don't care, but because you know that your peace isn't negotiable. This kind of emotional presence doesn't come from reading more books, following more dating tips, or rehearsing perfect responses. It comes from doing the deeper work, healing old wounds, challenging your internal narratives, and choosing to stand fully in who you are, even when love feels uncertain. Especially when love feels uncertain. Because self-worth is not built in the moments you feel desired, it's built in the moments you choose yourself when someone else doesn't. It's easy to feel worthy when everything is going right. The real test is when it's not. When someone pulls away, when the texts stop coming, when the attention fades, do you crumble or do you rise? Authentic self-worth is a frequency. It's an emotional tone that says, I am whole with or without you. And the truth is, avoidance and people in general are far more responsive to that tone than to pressure or pursuit. When they sense that you are not chasing, not trying to convince, not emotionally spiraling, they may still take their space, but the door in their mind doesn't close. They begin to wonder. They begin to reflect. And sometimes they begin to return, not because they were hunted down, but because they felt the quiet gravity of your self-respect. In contrast, constant pursuit can trigger the opposite effect. It reinforces the avoidance fear that closeness means pressure, that intimacy will cost them freedom. It confirms their belief that attachment comes with emotional responsibility they aren't ready for, and so they distance themselves further, creating the very outcome the chaser was trying to avoid. This cycle continues until one person steps out of it, until someone realizes that the only true control they have is over their own energy. That staying rooted in self-worth is not passive, it's powerful. It is an active stance that says, I know what I bring to the table. I know how to love, how to show up, how to give, but I also know how to walk away when I'm not met there. Space creates curiosity, chasing kills it. In the dance of human connection, especially in romantic or emotionally charged dynamics, the presence of space often acts like oxygen. It allows the flame to breathe, to grow, to burn brighter. When we give someone space, we're not abandoning them. We're allowing the natural rhythm of emotional processing, reflection, and desire to unfold without pressure. We're saying, in an unspoken language, I trust the connection enough not to smother it. That kind of energy doesn't repel, it draws people in. Because when someone isn't being chased, they're given the room to wonder, to miss, to feel, and most importantly, to choose. Chasing, on the other hand, often creates the opposite effect. It can feel desperate, frantic, or suffocating not because the emotions aren't real, but because the energy behind them is rooted in fear. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of being forgotten. And while those fears are deeply human, when we act from them, we shift the entire dynamic. We stop being a person to be connected with, and instead become a force to be managed, avoided, or even escaped. The more we chase, the less space the other person has to feel their own emotions. They're too busy reacting to our pursuit to feel anything else. And without space, there is no curiosity. Without curiosity, there is no pull. Curiosity is the secret thread that keeps people leaning in. It's the quiet voice that asks, what are they thinking? Do they miss me? Why haven't they reached out? It's this internal conversation that opens the door to reflection and emotional recognition. But curiosity only arises in silence, in pause, in absence. It cannot grow when answers are constantly being pushed into its place. Chasing fills the space where curiosity is supposed to bloom. Every text, every call, every attempt to reconnect too soon, too often, becomes an answer before a question can even form. And that kills mystery. It kills emotional tension. It kills the longing that often brings someone back to the table. When you create space, you allow the other person to reconnect with themselves, with their own inner experience. Especially with avoidance, this is essential. Avoidant individuals often feel overwhelmed when someone else's emotions demand too much of them. Their natural instinct is to retreat to create distance, not because they don't care, but because they feel safer in separation. When they're given space, they begin to feel less pressure, and without pressure, their defenses lower. With lowered defenses, they begin to feel again. They may notice your absence. They may remember your presence. They may replay moments in their mind, not because you reminded them, but because you gave them the quiet to revisit those emotions on their own terms. Space isn't silence out of punishment. It's silence rooted in self-respect. It says, I am here, but I am not begging. I am available, but I am not chasing. I care, but I am not collapsing. It's a posture of calm openness that invites curiosity rather than extinguishing it. When someone is given space and they choose to return, that choice is meaningful. It wasn't pulled from them, it came from within. And that's the difference between connection built on chasing and connection built on attraction. One requires constant effort to maintain, the other sustains itself through mutual pull. This doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing the right thing, focusing on yourself, nurturing your own life, staying grounded, and letting your energy speak for itself. When you stop chasing, you don't disappear. You simply stop interrupting the process. You become someone whose absence is felt in the best way. You stop being noise and become silence, the kind that lingers, the kind that echoes, the kind that makes someone wonder what they're missing. And in that wondering, you regain your power. You stop being the one who's always reaching and start being the one who's missed. People need time to process. They need space to evaluate. Not everyone responds in the moment. Some emotions are delayed, buried beneath old defenses or unresolved fears. But those emotions can't surface if they're constantly being chased down. Space is what invites them forward. It creates a gentle vacuum and absence that pulls rather than pushes. And that pull is irresistible when it comes from someone who isn't chasing, but who is still emotionally grounded, whole, and open. That balance is rare and therefore deeply attractive. When you chase, you deny someone the opportunity to pursue you. You take up all the space in the emotional equation, but when you step back, not in anger or punishment, but in peace, you allow room for reciprocity. You give them the chance to decide. You give them the space to miss you. You give them the freedom to come back, not because they were coerced, but because they wanted to. And in that want lies the foundation of true connection, built not on fear, but on choice. Change the energy, not the strategy. Your shift triggers their return. So often, when someone pulls away or disconnects emotionally, our instinct is to do more. We change our words, our timing, our actions. We send longer texts, give more compliments, ask different questions, try new ways to appear calm or unaffected, hoping these tactics will bring the person back. But strategy isn't the issue, it's the energy behind it. You can say the most perfect thing, follow all the so-called rules, and still push someone further away if the emotional frequency underneath your efforts is needy, anxious, or fearful. On the flip side, you can say very little, do almost nothing at all, and yet pull them back in, simply because your energy has shifted to calm confidence and emotional self-containment. Energy is felt before words are understood. People may not consciously know what shifted, but they respond to it. They feel it. Avoidants, especially, are highly sensitive to emotional pressure. They don't necessarily run from people, they run from energy that feels overwhelming, demanding, or intrusive. When you're operating from fear, fear of being left, fear of not being enough, fear of missing your chance, that energy leaks into everything you do. It's in the tone of your voice, the timing of your texts, the tension in your pauses. Even silence can carry anxious energy when it comes from a place of hoping, waiting, and watching. And that's why changing your strategy without shifting your energy doesn't work. It's like trying to disguise desperation under polite language. It might sound different, but it still feels the same. Changing your energy means transforming the internal state from which your actions arise. It means stepping into emotional sovereignty where your value is not determined by how someone responds to you. It means anchoring yourself in the belief that you are not waiting to be chosen, you already are someone worth choosing. This isn't about pretending or faking indifference. It's about cultivating genuine peace within yourself. Even as you care about someone who has stepped back, that peace becomes magnetic. It signals to the other person that you are not here to chase, to pressure, or to beg. You are here, steady and open, but not dependent. That's the energy shift that triggers a new response. When you change your energy, your actions naturally follow. You no longer send messages to provoke a reaction, you send them when it feels aligned. You don't hold back communication out of fear of looking too eager, you hold back because you're focused on your own world and your time is valuable. You stop performing emotional gymnastics to win someone back. You start radiating the truth of who you are, and that authenticity is more compelling than any tactic. People sense when you're grounded. They sense when your nervous system is calm. They sense when you're no longer trying to control the outcome, and that sense of internal freedom creates external permission for them to feel, reflect, and potentially return. This shift also liberates you. Instead of living in a constant state of reaction, watching their behavior, analyzing their silences, obsessing over mixed signals, you return to yourself. You begin to pour energy into your own emotional growth, your purpose, your joy. And as your attention turns inward in a healthy, self-affirming way, you become emotionally expansive rather than contractive. You become more attractive not because you're trying to be, but because self-trust and emotional groundedness are deeply appealing. It tells the world, I know who I am, and I won't lose myself just because someone else doesn't see it right now. Avoidants, in particular, don't respond well to being pursued relentlessly. But they do notice when the person who once chased them stops, and not out of punishment, but from inner clarity. That shift causes them to reevaluate. Curiosity grows. Reflection deepens. They begin to feel the absence of pressure, and with that absence, their emotional space returns. Sometimes they return because of that shift. Not because you changed your strategy, but because you changed your state. The connection begins to breathe again. They may reach out, test the waters, try to feel out your energy, and if your energy has truly shifted, they will notice the difference. They'll feel safer, more open, less threatened. This doesn't guarantee a fairy tale ending, but what it does guarantee is that you regain your emotional center. You stop being pulled by someone else's hot and cold behavior. You stop shrinking yourself for the hope of love. You stop leaking energy on strategies that exhaust you. And you start living in alignment with your worth. That's where power lies. That's where attraction begins, not in the performance, but in the presence. When you lead with grounded energy instead of grasping, everything changes. You don't just attract them back, you attract the kind of connection that honors who you are becoming.